It's great to be joined today by Mayor David Narkewicz, mayor of the city of Northampton, Massachusetts, where the David Pakman show started, no less, and also a city that is involved in the, I guess, somewhat confusing directive from the Trump administration's executive order with regard to so-called sanctuary cities. And Mayor Narkewicz, I mean, Maura Healey, the attorney general here, has been very, very direct since I think November 9th that she will do what is necessary to protect people, all people here in Massachusetts. What's your understanding of, as mayor, what you can no longer do or what you should be doing as a result of this executive order? Is it clear?
Well, thank you, David. It's great to be on with you. So, yeah, so-called sanctuary cities. When you actually read what President Trump's executive order said, it didn't actually effectuate any change. When you read it, he directs the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice to study or review ways to cut funding for sanctuary cities. So it didn't actually cut anything off. And as I've been saying for many months, I mean, first of all, what gets cities like Northampton and other cities in Massachusetts and across the country this designation is we've basically opted not to enforce what the Department of Homeland Security itself has said is an optional order, which is an administrative detainer request. We'll accept, a court order, we'll accept a warrant, but we will not hold people for up to 48 hours without charging them with anything at the behest of a bureaucrat in Washington. And that's really what the position of Northampton and many other communities who've been called these so-called sanctuary cities. That's really the position we've taken. So I am dubious that a city that refuses to do something, which in and of itself it cannot be required to do by the federal government. And this is on Fourth Amendment grounds. This is on 10th Amendment grounds, how we could then be penalized. So I'll be watching very carefully, like many other mayors and attorneys general, to see exactly what this review that the president's executive order has asked for yields.
And much of this has to do with individual decisions that police departments make, obviously in consultation with city councils, mayors, et cetera, in terms of cooperation with ICE agents. And I think the key point is the one you're getting at, which is that there is a range of ways in which police departments can choose to cooperate with ICE agents. And talk a little bit about sort of how this relates to the day-to-day of police, because a lot of this has to do with whether or not immigration status is even looked into during routine interactions with police. Is that right?
That's correct. And again, this gets back to the whole 10th Amendment question. And whether or not the federal government can essentially deputize a local law enforcement agency to carry out federal programs. Our position is, we have enough other responsibilities that we have to take care of as a local municipality, that we are then going to begin doing the work of federal agencies. And what I heard from members of our immigrant community was that these kinds of activities that are where they're conducted by local law enforcement really erodes trust in local law enforcement. That people begin to fear even people that are legally here with green cards, et cetera. That they begin to fear even coming forward to the police or reporting crimes to the police. It's something that even the International Association of Chiefs of Police has spoken about about this issue of eroding trust. And so if David Pakman is driving through Northampton and gets pulled over, you're
Common
going to
occurrence.
be common occurrence, yes. You're going to be treated like any other citizen, and the same thing with somebody who, may look foreign or maybe from another country. We are not in the business of asking people for their papers, like Arizona tried to do a few years ago, and that law was struck down. I mean, this is the question: is that it's not the role of local police to fix the nation's broken immigration system. I've been saying for years that rather than come up with these draconian measures to try to punish cities and towns. They should spend more energy on trying to fix the immigration system, which creates this whole universe of people that in many cases are law-abiding, they're paying taxes, they work here, they have family, they probably have children who were born here and are US citizens, and are trying to get through the immigration system to become legal and hopefully become citizens. But they've sort of been a victim of that process. So, again, the focus should be on fixing the immigration system, not on somehow deputizing local police officers to do the work of the federal government.
I'm curious whether, if there's been any direction or communication with the Massachusetts Attorney General, Maura Healey, there's been a sort of acknowledgement of the subjectivity of a lot of what is sort of implicit here. I mean, on the one hand, there's no legal definition for what is or isn't a sanctuary city. We're talking about different degrees, as I mentioned, of cooperation with immigration enforcement agencies. On the other hand, there's this, when it comes to what the federal government can or can't do in these cases, there's this 1987 case, South Dakota v. Dole, which says that the federal government can put requirements on states when giving them funding, but that it cannot be unduly coercive, which again is a term that has no sort of fixed objective definition. Is that part of the complexity here?
It's part of the complexity. I know that there have been interpretations of that particular case too that say that that some have argued that has to be part of the original intent of the legislation, that it can't just be cobbled on after the fact. So there's been differing interpretations. And again, this gets back to the whole issue of whether or not the president has the authority with the stroke of a pen to basically modify a series of laws that have been enacted by Congress. I mean, Title I, which is a program through the Department of Education that provides significant federal education dollars to Northampton, that was created under a statute enacted by Congress. So and in many cases that's a law that protects people. It's in place to ensure that people have access to an equal education. So I think it's going to get really complex when you start to deny people federal funding, that in some ways is embedded in our civil rights laws in terms of equal access, for kids with special needs, kids who are, from underserved populations, whatever it is, that it's going to really get complex that the Congress is going to modify a law that's going to take funding for these folks away in some of the biggest metropolitan cities in America.
Yeah,
so
and you're sort of speaking to the impact, and there's another angle to that as well. And the Los Angeles mayor, Eric Garcetti, made this point, which is you can, as the federal government, clearly take away funding from specific programs if a city isn't adhering to the requirements of that program. But here what we're talking about is the removal of funding because there's not the degree and scope of cooperation between federal and local officials, which is a completely different ballgame.
Exactly. And that's what I was referring to about the interpretation of that other case, that you can put conditions on the education funding, and you can require, local districts to provide statistics and do reporting and fill out forms, which, believe me, they do. And you can put other, kinds of restrictions on how those funds are used. But this goes pretty far afield of imposing requirements on educators for education funding.
Have you been briefed, considered, thought about, or is it anywhere in this entire discussion, what, if anything, could be repercussions against individuals like mayors, for example, for not going along with whatever is ultimately directed after the so-called study takes place? I mean, is that something you're thinking about or the Attorney General has discussed, for example?
I've talked to the Attorney General, and this isn't, we're not really at that level. I think at this point, a lot of what they're looking at are, again, these federal statutes, the underlying federal statutes for the programs that cities and towns receive funding from. During the campaign, Bobby Jindal was on the radio in Boston saying that, the mayors of Somerville and Northampton, et cetera, should be put in jail. I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric, but in terms of, again, I get back to Northampton's policy, and our policy is to exercise our option not to honor a form, which the form itself says voluntary on the form, these administrative detainer requests, which the Department of Homeland Security put out a legal memo citing case law all around the country that raised Fourth Amendment issues with these particular detainer requests. So again, there seems to be this perception, or at least the rhetoric is painting a perception that, the Northampton police or other local municipalities are going to be, standing at the borders, and if an ICE official or a federal official comes into our city, we're going to somehow prevent them, or alternatively, that we are allowing people to act lawlessly or commit crimes or do, that, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, Northampton was recently involved in a major human trafficking case that occurred that was actually led by the Massachusetts Attorney General. We were one of the lead agencies that involved people. In this case, these were people that were undocumented, in some cases that were being, trafficked by unscrupulous people. And we were right in the thick of that, investigating it. We helped to break that up. So again, we are not, there seems to be this perception that this is somehow a, get out of jail free card for anybody anyone who's an immigrant who commits a crime. And that is just not the case. What we want to do is we want to stay away from programs that ostensibly say that they're targeting violent criminals, but the vast majority of the evidence shows that's not who they're targeting. Yeah. And that's not who they have targeted. And that's not the kind of community that we want to have. We want to have a community that feels trusting of our police department and who's willing to work with us to keep all communities safe within the city of Northampton.
And of course, the big picture of this, and we won't even get into it, is the party of so-called states' rights coming in and saying, yeah, hey, here's new stuff the federal government will now tell states that they have to do. Truly, truly stunning. Yeah.
I mean, the leading case on this now is a 1987 case. Was authored by none other than Donald Trump's favorite Supreme Court Justice, Antonin Scalia. Who wrote an opinion which is sort of a continuation of the line of cases from a New York case, which it basically says, this federal government cannot deputize, cannot commandeer is the language that he used. Of course, he used it in the context of Brady Bill and the federal government requiring municipalities to do federal work around gun control. But it's the same principles, and it's Absolutely. Based on the same separation between, you've got the supremacy of the federal government, but anything not reserved to the federal government, by definition, is the purview of state and local and their subdivisions, which means local government. So yes, it's always amusing to me how the party wants to get government out of our affairs. They want to, they don't want big government. They want to give power back to the states, except when they don't.
Absolutely. We've been speaking with Mayor David Narkewicz of Northampton, Massachusetts. We're going to keep following what ultimately comes of this, and I know you will as well. Thanks for talking to me about this.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me on, and much success to you in this show, which, as you said, started right here in the city of Northampton.
Thank you.